Hi, this is Ed, San Diego, and in this pre-Christmas holiday time, our special guest today is Ken OEHLER, PhD in industrial psychology and organization development. He's a senior partner now in a new company called Radical Work, LLC. Radical is spelled RADICL, Radical Work, LLC. They're based in Minneapolis. Ken is in the New York area. He'll be joining us live in just a few minutes here on Global TV Talk Show. They put together predictions, people predictions for 24 based upon what's going on now and has been post-pandemic in the workplaces. And his focus is on customer experience, and the employee is customer. So you can imagine the turmoil that's going on. Hybrid has settled in. All kinds of distributed work places. So we're going to begin with Ken in just a minute. Okay, we're back on Global TV Talk Show, and special guest right here, right now, live, is Ken OEHLER, PhD. Hi, Ken. Welcome again.
Thanks, Ed. Great to be here.
Okay, so I was just announcing you in the pre-warm-up here about Radical, RADICL. And so Radical means what to you?
Yeah, well, so Radical is a advisory and technology company, and we're on a mission to create epic work experiences for everyone. And generally, I would say there's dissatisfaction of where we are with the employee experience and the outcomes of the employee experience across the board. I think from employees, from leaders, from HR, and there's work to be done. And I think we're at a point where we're going to have to get, no pun intended, we're going to have to get radical to do something different, because we've been at this for a few decades now, and we keep getting the same outcomes, whether you take Gallup's data that 3 out of 10 people are engaged, or our own data that says 20% of people are having an epic work experience. That's just unacceptable. But we keep trying to do the same things or having incremental innovation. And so we're at a point where we're really thinking about flipping the paradigm and working with companies, both in terms of strategies and technology to take a much more radical approach, much more human-centric approach
Okay, so
fixing this.
the employee is a customer.
Absolutely, yes, and
Yeah.
becoming much more um, starting with what the employee needs and designing around that, and finding the commonalities. And one of the things we keep finding in our research is uh, employees want productivity and impact and alignment with mission-centric goals as much as leaders, but it feels a little bit different. So it's about finding that commonality and the common value creation in this gap between leaders and employees.
So I need to, in my view, cut to the chase here. So we're talking about people under 30 years old and lack of trust in seniors of anything more senior. and these kids are these people are they grew up with a phone in their hand, and the fingers move a mile a minute, and they're just tuned in 100% of the time, and co-mingling in their brains what they're looking at on the phone and what they have to do in front of them at work. So most of the managers, I think, are much older. And so there's an automatic disconnect or lack of trust, right?
Well, what we find in our research is the trust isn't the trust issue is not only with the Gen Z and Gen Y. And what's becoming interesting, and one of the things that we've been looking at in our predictions report for 2024 is, what does this mean now with these generational shifts? And so one of the things I think that you're alluding to is how many digital natives we now have, people that grew up and never knew a world without the internet, or and what does that mean in terms of the technology that they're using? And so, yeah, whereas the management is mostly older, the management is now largely millennial. So the millennials are also very much digital natives. So what we are seeing is the trend over time, and the bigger differences are um, comparing that with the boomers that are really now phasing out into retirement, and Gen X, and the preferences and the ways of working there. But the trust issue between employees and management and the senior leaders is relatively pervasive across the generations.
Okay, so this is evident in society for sure. And look what's going on in college campuses recently, and so politicized. And that's because of the media coverage. It's intense. It's just part of life. And so managers in a company with a distributed workforce, meaning hybrid is here to stay. And that means I could work from my desktop here in San Diego with you in New York area, and if we could, we'd have somebody from Dubai or India on the show as well. So is that called? That's not called co-locating, right? That's distributed,
That's
and
distributed. Yeah,
it's
co-located
not
would
not a
be.
big deal, right? I mean, we do it. We've been doing it for 4 years. Why?
Yeah, and I mean this, you're hitting on another one of our big areas in our predictions report is that um depending on the media you read, you would think, well, everybody's going back to the office, or there's a new report on this company is forcing people back to the office. The reality is, and if you read Nick Bloom et al.'s research, that they track this monthly, that we've largely stabilized at about 30% work from home at this point. So we are stabilizing in a hybrid or work environment, which also means distributed. So you talked about geographic distribution, and one of the things we found in our research, we released a report on what we call fluid teams earlier this year, is that only 19% of people say that they're actually working on co-located teams, meaning their whole team is in the same office in the same location. So that really calls into question why we would force people back into the office as it is, when on the flip side, two-thirds of people are working on a distributed team across many geographic locations and or cross-functional teams that are likely also spanning beyond just their core team. So, to your point, forcing people back into the office to get on Zoom calls really isn't solving the question at hand, I think, which leaders are looking for: connection, keeping the culture intact. But it's the wrong solution for the right problem. And so what that means is we have to think about new ways of keeping that connection and culture alive through different modes of work that, frankly, have been around for a while. I mean, being on a video conference like this, and teams working across multiple locations, that's been around for a while. But so what that means is new routines of collaboration, knowing when you do need to get people on airplanes or commute into an office to do creative collaborative work with a team across maybe multiple functions. That's very, very valid. But just saying, well, everybody should be in Tuesday through Thursday arbitrarily, peanut butter spread across everybody, that's not really the right solution.
So let's talk now about you for a second. You have a PhD in industrial psychology, organizational development, and
Correct.
that was a while ago. And so you're seeing applications from what they taught you at university back then. and all the preparation to achieve the PhD designation. And is that kind of a thing updated? Do you need to update yourself with the review board that it's still valid because of all the technology and AI and whatever?
Well, I would say you have to keep doing research and keep working and understanding what's going on to stay current and stay relevant. I was talking with some colleagues the other day, and largely the content of industrial organizational psychology or organizational behavior, the inputs and the outputs are largely the same. It's in work, it is about how you structure work, how you bring teams together, why and how people are motivated, what leaders need to do, what are the drivers and enablers of this work. So those things have largely been the same since I started. What's changing significantly is the context and the modes of working. So, relative to the 1950s or the 1970s, when largely people were co-located and it was, pre-internet, pre-digital revolution, work was very different. The how, where, and what of work has changed significantly. But the concept of human behavior and human motivation, it's largely the same, but you have to understand you've got new inputs. So, what's the difference now that when you're the variable of, say, interaction of personality with a digital medium like a video conference versus face to face. For example, some of the research we're working on right now shows that personality has a pretty high level of prediction of whether someone wants to work remote or not, and even how they might want to communicate, meaning, like, do they want to communicate face to face? Would they rather communicate by chat, or communicate by even a shared document? And some of those things are the things you might expect, like introversion, extroversion, but there's also some other things in the personality profile. So, studying personality has been around since I started and before I started. But now we're asking new questions of, well, how does personality affect these new modes of working?
So some of the stereotypes is that the younger generation, not all, of course, but many, are introverted because they're so concentrated on digital right in front of them, and that's how they grew up. And they didn't have time, or they didn't understand the need to develop interpersonal communication skills, not to be
Yeah.
miss popularity, or but just be a person,
Yeah.
exhibit personality.
Yeah. Well, you sort of alluded to something. I think there's this paradox with the generational research, and I think we've learned this in DEI studies, that stereotypes of gross stereotypes across groups are quite dangerous. And so I always issue caveats when you start saying, blanket statements about here's what Gen Y is like or what millennials are like, because you will always find exceptions. Now, we do see some patterns, and I think as you mentioned, I think that the younger generation have just grown up in a world where they're more connected through apps, and we actually find this in our data that they do, the younger generations prefer chat now over email. Email and phone are dying mediums, and so we're seeing changes come along with the younger generations, patterns of these things. So whether that's directly connected to personality or we're seeing a gross personality shift, I'm less clear on that. I think, likely not.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Wow. So let's talk about bosses and employees, bosses and staff. Maybe that's a more appropriate word. and I'm listening to you, so you tell me. You're the PhD. Um, but the audience out here is a mixed bag, and worldwide, although 60% US, but very tuned in to what exactly we're talking about now. And I'm trying to relate what's going on in Radical and your predictions about how do bosses and staff become more human together. And
Yeah.
it's when we did your exercise, your design thinking exercise recently at EY in New York, that at first people were afraid to do anything, and then everybody got up and started moving paper around, and everybody just loosened up, and it was great for communications.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a model in leadership in its simplest form. Leaders do two things. They set direction or structure, and there's the human aspect. They need to show consideration of others. And I think what we're finding is in this new environment and with new generations, and particularly with, and this is a common theme across the predictions that we've been talking about, is there's just so much pressure in the system, whether it's from economic pressure, from the political pressure that 2024 is going to be a wild year with the US presidential election, with the concerns about disconnect and loneliness and isolation from remote work, with the how fast AI is coming at people with the new generations and what they expect. What this means largely for leaders is, again, it's the behaviors aren't that different, but it's about where are you spending your time and where you turn up the volume. And at its core is we need to see much more empathy and connection from leaders, and taking the time to listen and understand where people are. And I like to always say, well, leaders aren't just the folks that have the title CEO or vice president or director or whatever that may be. Everybody is a leader. And so there is a opportunity for all in the workplace to take a little bit more time and empathize with where people are in this current environment. And the other area that a couple other areas where I would say have always been around, but we really need to turn up the volume. The other one is being a connector. So in a more distributed world that's less linear across, the way the HRIS files say that the organization is structured, when it's actually highly matrixed for most organizations, leaders and others and everyone in organizations need to take more time to think about how can I connect this person with this person for both their individual betterment, but for the betterment of the organization. Where is there this 1 + 1 = 3 value to be had? The last place I'll say that we continuously see in our research that we need to turn up the volume a bit on is empowerment, and that this is again, it's always been there. We're seeing it as there's a generational shift, which is, don't tell me how to do my job, but I do need direction. And I think that's been the thing with the empowerment. So I think too many leaders have just been like, okay, well, figure it out. People still need clarity of direction, but it's more about, here's what this organization is all about. Here's where we're going. Here are the outcomes we would like to see, but I'm going to empower you because you're closest to this to figure out the best way to deal with it. And so I would say it's, those three in combination, the empathy, connection, and empowerment. If we can turn up the volume on that and take a little bit of time before there's a rush to judgment or worse, rush to cancellation, I think we would be there's a big opportunity, and we'd all be better off for it.
This is really interesting. We're running out of time here, but we have a few minutes left. So I want to go back to the EY presentation, November 30th.
Yeah.
when you your one of your sub themes of your talk and your leadership in that session that struck me, uh, you came up with the phrase of how might we dot dot dot. How might we change something that's not working? How might we do this? That's really a genteel way of how do we get this done? Give me your input, feedback. And so what do you address that a little bit in context of communicating how to do things rather than go figure it out, but how to do things, leadership?
Yeah. So I did not come up with that phrase. I wish I had. How might we, as an exercise that in the agile or sprint framework and in a design thinking framework, where you're asking people to ideate solutions,
Right.
and you know, there is a subtlety in the language there. And you said, you know, it's a nicer way to say, well, how do we get this done? Um, when you say, you know, you could say, what should we do? How should we? And the word should has a connotation of there's a right answer or a wrong answer. And when you back up a bit and you ask people to say, how might we? It suddenly opens the aperture to get way more creative. And again, this fits very well with, you know, how we started this conversation about getting more radical, because, you know, I think it's very easy to sort of there's so much inertia in the system. And if you say, how should we, you know, that's when you start saying, well, should we use a 5-point performance management scale instead of a 3-point performance? So you're doing these incremental tweaks within what you think is already right, is already the way we should be doing it. Asking people and inviting people to say, how might we, invites them to be wrong.
Yeah.
But sometimes the stuff that sounds wrong at first is actually very right for the new way forward. So it's just a simple phrase uh, to invite people to be much more creative and ideate in ways that, you know, are quote unquote outside the box.
Interesting. So one of the themes that came out of the EY meeting was the EY report, their survey results of customers, big corporate customers, about repositioning HR, repositioning talent mobility, repositioning the real estate that is
Mhm.
going unused. And so from that point of view, it's almost like the radical idea that you're talking about, just repositioning the old way. So part of all this, to me, brings up the necessity of the management staff. Like I'm old, you know, so how can I relate to somebody who would be my grandson?
Mm. Well, yeah, so we have 4 generations in the workforce right now, and in a lot of ways that goes back to empathy that we were talking about. You know, one of the things that a couple of things you mentioned that are really interesting there. One is in our report we talk about all this business pressure that's in the system, and I don't think 2024 is we're necessarily going to see the tailwinds just yet. I think we're going to continue to feel the pressure from the inflation that's in the system. It's still very expensive to borrow money with interest rates. 50% of CEOs from CEO magazine said they expect to be in a mild recession in 2024. So thinking about HR differently, as you talked about, or just thinking about people differently, there's a tremendous opportunity to optimize, to think about the whole system of HR and the people programs and reallocate. So a very quick example, as you alluded to, would be, well, what if we shrunk our footprint, our real estate footprint significantly, redesigned that office and took some of the money in the real estate that we saved and reinvested that in other areas that are going to, and that could be like travel budgets of when we do need people to come into the office, and thinking of new policies and programs to help people work in this distributed world, because we're not quite good at that yet. And there's an opportunity to actually spend less in aggregate, but spend it better. But it's going to take breaking down the silos and thinking about HR and the whole people ecosystem differently. So there's that side. That you had also asked about how do I work with someone who might be the age of my grandson or granddaughter. You know, the thing with the talent pressures that are in the system and the multi-generational thing, and the fact that 65% of the workforce will be Gen Y, Gen Z by 2030, and boomers will largely be out of the workforce. And everybody's got different preferences. And at the same time, we have these talent gaps. And at the same time, we're still looking at 8 out of 10 people not having an experience full of meaning, clarity, and connection. Again, it really pushes the individual to the forefront. So not even thinking about people and blanket averages of, well, this is a Gen Z worker, this is what they want. No, like, Ed, what do you want? You know, how do you like to work? You know, meaning, what time of day do you like to do your focus work? When do you like to do collaborative work? How do you like to do that? What types of technologies are the best ways to reach you? Text, email, or picking up the phone, or whatever it may be. You know, increasing use of shared documents is another thing that we're seeing. What is my personality profile and my work preferences? Really understanding these things at the individual level. What do I like to do out of work? What are my responsibilities outside of work that push into this? You know, seeing the whole person, you know, their motivations, where they want to be in 5 years, et cetera. So that's probably, you know, the biggest opportunity. And I'm not sure it's even an opportunity. I think the younger generations are frankly going to demand it. And it will be how we have to work. And it's, you know, it's sort of the table stakes or the starting place of having a better work experience for everyone.
Ken, thank you very much for all this. So everybody out there, radicalwork.com. I'm going to spell it again. RADICL work. Radical with no I, no A. radicalwork.com. And info@radicalwork.com is how people can get more info.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you get to the webpage, yeah, all of our thought leadership is on the webpage, our 2024 predictions and some of the other research that I alluded to, and you can contact any of us.
So I'm just going to read the closing line here in your report. Opportunity to optimize, connect, regenerate, collaborate, and refocus on individuals in new ways to make work better. And your phrase is to make work epic, meaning what, like the 10 Commandments? Some kind of
So yeah,
spectacle?
when we talk about epic work, you know, there's a measurement system behind this. When we work with clients, the shorthand is, when we say this a lot: meaning, clarity, and connection. Employees want this, they're demanding it. It's actually quite hard to have all of those at the same time. But when you do have that, and when you have that for extended periods of time, that's when we see people having an epic work experience.
Thank you, Ken OEHLER, and Merry Christmas to you.
Same to you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Okay, come back. Thank you.
Bye-bye.